I was a mother of two, living what seemed to be a typical life. But things changed when I found myself drawn to Hamza, a 20-year-old boy from the neighborhood. He often visited me under the guise of retrieving lost items or casual greetings. But there was something about his demeanor that intrigued me. Whenever he came by, he had a peculiar habit of chewing a special kind of betel leaf, pan, which I found odd yet fascinating. One day I insisted he skip his routine and refrain from chewing it. What happened next shocked me. His entire demeanor changed, and within 2 minutes he became uncharacteristically vulnerable. It had rained that day and the weather was crisp and fresh. The fragrance of flowers lingered in the air, carried by the gentle breeze, creating an idyllic atmosphere. I was sitting in the lawn, sipping tea, and enjoying the serene beauty of the moment. Tea wasn't something I particularly liked, but there was something about rainy days that made the pairing irresistible. As I sipped my tea, my daughter Gudia came to me with her drawing book and asked me to sketch something for her. Placing my teacup on the table, I began drawing for her. Suddenly, a ball from the neighbor's yard bounced into ours, knocking over my cup and spilling the tea. Frustrated, I looked at the mess and grew angry at the carelessness of our neighbors. Moments later, the doorbell rang. Irritated, I opened the door to find a young man standing there asking for the ball. Annoyed, I scolded him harshly and refused to return the ball. He stood quietly, respectful, despite my tone. Without another word, I shut the door on him and went back inside. No sooner had I sat down than the doorbell rang again. Angrier this time, I stormed to the door and unleashed my frustration on him. Once again, he remained calm and simply said, "Anger doesn't suit a beautiful woman." His words caught me off guard. Despite my harshness, he complimented me, leaving me both surprised and confused. Relenting, I handed him the ball, warning him to be careful in the future. He gave me a mischievous smile, thanked me, and walked away. I noticed a playful spark in his eyes, but chose to ignore it and returned to my daughter. A few days later, I went to the rooftop to hang laundry to dry. From there, I noticed the same boy, Hamza, walking on his rooftop. Our houses were close enough for us to talk without raising our voices. I tried my best to ignore him, but I found my gaze drifting toward him repeatedly. He noticed too. Seeing me, he approached and asked a few casual questions about my household. His eyes sparkled with a mischief that I couldn't quite place. "I'm Hamza," he said, extending his hand. Reluctantly, I shook it and replied, "I'm Maria." "Maria? What a beautiful name. Just like you," he said with a smile. His compliment made me blush, and I quickly gathered my laundry basket and hurried downstairs, feeling his eyes on me as I left. From that day forward, we began having light conversations whenever I went to the rooftop. Sometimes I went up to hang my children's school uniforms to dry, other times to leave my husband's shoes in the sun. My husband worked at an office in a respectable position, leaving early in the morning and returning late in the evening. I spent most of my days alone with the kids. My mother-in-law, bedridden due to a stroke, stayed in her room, and while I had a maid to help with the household chores, I often found myself with little to do during the day once the children were at school. Hamza's presence became a small yet undeniable distraction in my monotonous routine. What started as casual exchanges soon grew into something more, as his charm and wit slowly drew me closer. Gradually, my conversations with Hamza became more frequent. Our friendship deepened to the point where I would call him for even the smallest things, and he seemed to always be waiting for my call. Hamza, the son of a wealthy factory owner, had little to worry about in life. After completing his MBA, he was now free and spent most of his time idling at home. Whenever he came to visit, he always seemed to be chewing on his signature pan. One morning, I noticed my mother-in-law wasn't feeling well. Concerned, I called my husband, who rushed home and took her to the hospital. Shortly after they left, Hamza called me. I was still at the hospital when my phone rang. My husband, noticing the call, asked, "Who's calling?" Nervously, I dismissed it, saying, "Just a friend checking in." My husband, a simple and trusting man, didn't press further and sat quietly. Excusing myself, I stepped out of the ward to answer the call. "Hamza, what's up?" "I'm at the hospital," I said hurriedly as I answered. "I've been thinking about you all morning," he said. "Not seeing you has made me restless." "Hamza, I'm at the hospital. I've told you so many times. There's no signal here, and I can't take calls freely. especially with my husband around. If he catches me, I'll be in serious trouble. You're even more beautiful when you're angry. I just wanted to hear your voice, he replied playfully. Despite my frustration, his compliment softened me. Fine, I'll be home in the evening. Then you can see me to your heart's content. Now hang up or my husband might come looking for me. All right, if that's what makes you happy, he said, his tone tinged with annoyance, and hung up. The abrupt end to the call left me uneasy. I tried calling him back, but he ignored my calls, further fueling my anxiety. For the first time, Hamza seemed genuinely upset with me. With no response from him, I returned to my husband, trying to mask my worry. Who was it? My husband asked, noticing my troubled expression. I told you, just a friend, I replied. I'm just stressed about your mom's condition. When can we go home? I tried to divert the conversation. Soon, he said, holding my hand. Once they shift her from the ICU, we'll take her home. I silently thanked God for the reprieve and waited for the moment we could leave the hospital. As soon as we arrived home, I put my bag down and rushed to the rooftop. Fortunately, Hamza was already there, pacing. When he saw me, he turned to leave, but I called out, Hamza! He stopped and turned back toward me. What is it? Make it quick. I don't have all day, he said coldly. Still upset? I asked. I'm here now. Can't you let it go and cheer up? Do you even realize how much I missed you? He said, his frustration evident. I haven't seen you all day, and when I finally called, you brushed me off because you were scared of your husband. You know how much I love you. I can't live without you. His words made my heart race, a mix of guilt and a strange excitement. Hamza, you know I care about you too, I replied softly. But you need to understand my situation. It's not as simple as you think. Hamza's eyes softened as he stepped closer. Then prove it, he said. Show me that I matter to you more than he does. He spoke quickly and grabbed my hand. If you ever refuse to talk to me again, I'll never forgive you, he warned me. Fine, I won't. Are you happy now? I replied, trying to ease his mood. He gave a faint smile and I added, Finally, you smiled. That's better. Just then, I heard the sound of footsteps coming up the stairs. I turned to see my husband approaching. Hamza quickly moved to the other side of the roof, pretending to answer a call, and then quietly went back to his side of the rooftop. Seeing him leave gave me a sense of relief. My husband asked, What are you doing up here? I've been looking for you. You came straight to the rooftop after the hospital? Is everything okay? Trying to brush it off, I replied, I just needed some fresh air. I wasn't feeling well after all that happened at the hospital. All right, but come downstairs. It's time for Mom's medicine, he said, taking my hand and leading me back inside. I silently thanked God that we had narrowly avoided any suspicion and followed him down the stairs. The next day, my mother-in-law's health had improved and my husband returned to work. I felt a surge of excitement knowing I would finally have the chance to speak with Hamza, but when I called him, he didn't answer. I tried again, and he cut the call. My heart sank. He wasn't picking up, and he didn't show up on the rooftop either. A wave of anxiety washed over me as I wondered what could have happened. By noon, I could no longer contain myself. My thoughts spiraled with questions. Why isn't he answering? What's wrong? I felt an overwhelming urge to fly to him, desperate for answers. Unable to wait any longer, I decided to go to Hamza's house. I rang the doorbell several times before he finally opened the door. Seeing me there, he looked surprised. After all, I had never visited him at home before. What's going on? I asked as I stepped inside. You're not answering my calls, and you haven't been on the rooftop. What's wrong? Hamza didn't respond. He turned and walked further into the house, his demeanor cold and distant. Frustrated, I grabbed his hand and stopped him. Hamza, I'm talking to you. You know how much I care about you. Why are you acting like this? Why are you ignoring me? Let go of my hand, he said sharply. Let's talk inside. His tone was indifferent, almost dismissive, and it cut deep. Reluctantly, I followed him into his room. The house was eerily quiet. There was no one else home. Now tell me, I demanded, my voice trembling. What's wrong? Why are you being so distant? You know I can't handle your indifference." My eyes welled up with tears, threatening to spill. I felt on the verge of breaking. He suddenly stood up, pulled me into a tight embrace, and said, "I was just testing you to see how much you truly love me, to see if you long for me as much as I long for you. But now I'm convinced you really do care for me as deeply as I care for you." "You were testing my love, Hamza? How could you even think I don't love you? I love you so much, more than you can imagine. Test me as much as you want, but please don't push me away like this again." "I can't live without you," I said, tightening my arms around him. "All right," he said, gently pulling away. "What can you do for me? How can you prove your love?" "Anything. Whatever you ask of me. Wherever, whenever. You call and I'll be there," I replied, looking into his eyes with unwavering confidence. "Think carefully," he said with a teasing smile. "You're making a big promise. What if you back out?" "I never go back on my word. Test me if you don't believe it," I said with certainty. "All right," he said with a smirk. "We'll see about that. For now, how about I make us some tea and we enjoy it together?" Relieved by his softened tone, I nodded and we went to the kitchen together. We kept our interactions within boundaries, though our affection for each other grew stronger. I couldn't help but express my annoyance at his constant habit of chewing betel leaves. "What is it with this pond? It has such a strange smell," I said, wrinkling my nose. "It's a special kind of pond, made to order," he explained, laughing off my irritation. That day, I was especially happy because my husband had been assigned an overseas work trip for a month. When I shared the news with Hamza, he was just as excited. Finally, the days we had dreamed of were within reach. Soon we would have the freedom to be together without fear, without restrictions, and without anyone imposing boundaries on us. My husband's flight was in the evening. I packed his bags, and after returning from work, he spent time with his mother and the kids, giving them his attention before he left. As he said goodbye to me, he gave a few instructions and left for the airport. While his departure made the children sad, I couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement. I quickly fed the kids, tucked them into bed, and retreated to my room. Picking up my phone, I called Hamza. As soon as he answered, he expressed his desire to meet. "If you don't meet me tonight, I'll break things off," he warned. "What's the issue now? Your husband is gone. Why are you still making excuses?" He wanted to come to my room under the cover of night, but I hesitated. My mother-in-law, though bedridden, was still in the house, and I didn't want to risk raising her suspicions. "Listen, Hamza," I began, trying to reason with him. "The situation isn't as simple as it seems. She might be confined to her bed, but I can't take any chances." "Enough excuses," he interrupted. "It's now or never. Show me how much you care." Despite my hesitation and fear, Hamza's persistence finally broke my resolve. I reluctantly agreed to let him come to my room. He was overjoyed, quickly ended the call, and assured me he'd be there soon. With the house quiet, my kids asleep, and my husband away, Hamza seized the opportunity. Although I had agreed, I was overwhelmed with dread, unsure if I was making the right decision. Hamza eventually arrived. As soon as he entered, he pulled me into his arms, showering me with affection. It was a kind of passion I had never experienced even in my marriage. I felt conflicted but didn't stop him. At one point, I pushed him back and said, "Don't chew that pond tonight. Its smell is unbearable." Hamza laughed and revealed, "This isn't just any pond. It's laced with a special intoxicant, and it's worth thousands. It keeps me feeling elated." He even tried to convince me to try it, but just as he was persuading me, I felt the presence of someone else in the room. I froze, and my worst fear came true. It was my husband. He stood at the door, stunned beyond belief, as if the ground beneath his feet had vanished. "You!" I gasped, unable to contain my shock. Fear gripped me, and I began trembling. Hamza hastily grabbed his clothes and dressed. I scrambled to cover myself, shame washing over me, my husband's piercing gaze locked onto mine. "Why are you ashamed now?" he asked coldly. "But you had no shame a moment ago, did you?" His words cut deep. "I thought you'd left for good." "Why are you back?" I stammered, trying to think of an excuse. "If I'd left, how would I have seen your true colors?" he said angrily. His voice was filled with pain and betrayal. I quickly fell to my knees, clutching his feet. "Please forgive me. I made a terrible mistake. I was weak. I don't know what came over me, I begged, tears streaming down my face. By the time I looked up, Hamza had slipped out of the room and escaped. My husband was seething. If Hamza had stayed, I feared my husband would have killed him. His anger was justified. He had walked in on a scene that no self-respecting man could endure. It was the kind of betrayal that could destroy anyone. Yet he didn't lash out violently. Instead, he sat down, cradling his head in his hands, looking utterly defeated. I spent the entire night begging for his forgiveness, pleading and reminding him of our children. But his patience finally snapped. "Don't you dare bring up my children," he said harshly. "You don't even deserve to say their names. You've shamed yourself and betrayed me in the worst possible way." "Call me anything you want," I sobbed, "but please don't throw me out of your life. I can't live without my kids. I'll do anything to make it right." He looked at me with a mix of anger and heartbreak. "How can I ever trust you again? I gave you everything, my love, my trust, my life, and you threw it all away for a stranger. Why? Why would you destroy our family for someone else?" His words were a mirror reflecting my guilt. For the first time, I realized how low I had fallen in my obsession with Hamza. I had never stopped to think about my husband, the man who worked tirelessly to provide me a life of comfort, or my children who depended on me. I had been selfish and reckless, caring only for my own desires. The weight of my actions crushed me. How could I betray the man who had trusted me blindly? How could I call myself a mother when I had so blatantly ignored my children's well-being for my own indulgence? I spent the entire night at his feet, begging for forgiveness. But no matter how much I pleaded, he refused to forgive me. "I trusted you more than anything, and you shattered that trust," he said, his voice heavy with pain. "How could you expect me to look at you the same way again?" In the morning, my husband called a lawyer and divorced me. He paid my alimony and asked me to leave the house immediately. I pleaded, begged, and even fell at his feet. But he wouldn't forgive me. He probably hated me now. He didn't even want to see my face or allow my shadow to fall on our children. I pitied myself as I realized how I had destroyed my own paradise with my own hands. My husband had given me a life that was nothing less than heaven, full of peace and comfort. But a small mistake had brought me to where I was now. My love for another man had blinded me so much that I didn't even think about my family, my sacred relationships, and the respect I had in my life. Because of me, my parents also had to bear great shame. I didn't want to leave the house, but my husband pushed me out, taking my children away. When I hugged my children for the last time, I realized the gravity of my sin. I had not only betrayed my husband's trust, but also shattered the foundation of love and respect he had given me. When I hugged my daughter for the last time, tears streamed down my face as I broke down crying. She innocently asked, "Mama, why are you crying?" How could I explain to her the sin I had committed, the punishment for which she and her siblings would have to bear for the rest of their lives? As I left the house, I cast a longing glance at the home where I had once entered as a bride with so much love and respect. Today, I was leaving in disgrace. My husband's eyes were filled with tears, and my children's faces were full of questions that would haunt them forever. When a mother is dishonored, the lives of her children become a living nightmare. Society starts questioning them, and their future is put at risk. After leaving, I called Hamza repeatedly and sent him messages, but he didn't respond. I was already devastated because of the divorce, and now Hamza's silence added to my pain. After days without any response, I decided to go to his house to see him. When I rang the doorbell, his sister answered. I asked her about Hamza, and she told me he was in his room. His mother was also home that day. When I entered his room, I saw Hamza sitting casually, laughing and talking on his phone as if nothing had happened. His carefree attitude shocked me. He turned around and saw me standing there. "What are you doing here? How dare you come into my room?" he said, reacting as though I had committed a grave offense by being there. I replied, "You haven't answered my calls. Do you even know what has happened because of you? My husband divorced me, took my children away, and threw me out of the house, and you act like nothing's wrong." Hamza's expression darkened, and he replied coldly, "Because of me? Don't blame me for your ruined life. Your downfall is because of your own character." His words hit me like a thunderbolt. The man who had caused so much destruction in my life was now questioning my character. I was left speechless. At that moment, his mother entered the room and began berating me. She accused me of being characterless and said many other hurtful things, adding to my humiliation. Hamza stayed silent throughout, neither defending me nor taking any responsibility. I couldn't breathe. My world was crumbling around me. I left his house immediately, unable to bear the humiliation. I had lost everything: my home, my family, my dignity. The man for whom I had betrayed my husband and children had abandoned me, leaving me empty-handed.